Welcome back to the Pathways to Prevention podcast, where we dive deep into the stories and insights of those making a real impact in the field of prevention, treatment, and recovery. I'm your host, Dave Closson, and today we have a truly inspirational guest whose journey is a testament to resilience, to innovation, and the power of lived experience. Dr. David Patton, an associate professor in criminology at the University of Derby, joins us today. And Dr. Patton has dedicated his career to exploring the intersections of drug addiction, recovery, and pathways to breaking free from crime. But what makes his story extraordinary is not just his academic achievements, but his personal journey. Growing up in England during a time of industrial decline and social inequality, Dr. Patton faced numerous challenges. From witnessing the impacts of austerity to overcoming the barriers of a system that often overlooks voices like his, Dr. Patton has used these experiences to fuel his passion for change. And in this episode, we'll explore how he challenges the status quo, learns from his lived experiences, and applies a unique perspective to his groundbreaking research. We'll delve into innovative methods like participatory research and photo voice, which empowers communities to share their stories authentically and contribute to a more inclusive and supportive environment for recovery. So sit back, get comfortable, and prepare to be inspired by a conversation that goes beyond academia and touches the very heart of resilience and innovation. The vision, a world where all people live free of the burden of drug abuse. This is the Drug Free America Foundation's Pathway to Prevention podcast, where we are committed to developing strategies that prevent drug use and promote sustained recovery. Thank you for not only tuning in, but your continued support and efforts to help make this world a better place. We hope you enjoyed this episode. All right, folks, here we go. Another wonderful conversation. I am so honored to welcome Dr. David Patton to the podcast. Welcome.
Oh, Dave, it's so great to see you and be with you here today. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk.
Oh, always a delight to chat, to connect with you. And just a fun little backstory for the listeners. We first met at the meeting of the Davids in Florida for Drug Free America Foundation's annual summit, which, listeners, y'all have not attended that. Yes, folks travel, the experts, the speakers travel from all across the globe to Florida for an incredible event. So keep that on your radar for this next year and stay tuned for any updates on that, because incredible people like Dr. David Patton. So, kind sir, what do you do? And also, I hinted at it, but where in this world are you located?
Yeah. So I'm located I live in Sheffield in England with my wife and family, got 3 lovely children. But the day job is as an associate professor in criminology at the University of Derby, we're both located around the centre of England. So I've been there for about 9 years now. And I guess the work I do is around kind of drug addiction, drug recovery, and also mapping pathways to desistance from crime. Be it in a nutshell.
All right. Well, I'm gonna crack that nutshell open a little bit and just explore a little bit more as far as who is Dr. David Patton, because I was listening to your episode where you were on the Unnecessary Harm podcast, which, listeners, check that whole podcast out. I'll put a link in the show notes. And I felt like I got to know you on such a deeper, more personal level, and I couldn't help but want to know more. So I'm curious about sort of the journey in to the work that you do now. And if I remember correctly, you grew up kind of in the northeast area of England?
Yeah, that's right. So kind of in England, I guess there's a typical, well, there's a north-south divide, shall we say.
Uh-huh.
So kind of the richer area is kind of considered to be down south near London, and there's a cut-off point. And so some people who live in London, it's like they never leave because why would you, darling? And so there's a real lack of investment as well, in terms of infrastructure, thinking about structural things and employment rates and quality of health provision and housing. There's a real inequality divide nationally. And so I grew up in the Northeast, a small town called Middlesbrough, which is kind of on the right-hand kind of coastal area. And during a time of real austerity, kind of Margaret Thatcher was in power at the time, which is our conservative kind of party, a bit like the Republican kind of party in America. And essentially what she did was that she privatized and eroded a lot of the blue-collar worker industry, which was very much the lifeblood of those communities. So during my time of living there, I saw I didn't have the language for this at the time, but kind of how social policy can obliterate generation. How my own dad was made redundant. He, worked in kind of the steel industry at that time, because that industry kind of went overnight almost, and saw the repercussion for many people in the community that I lived and grew up in. And also, as I entered kind of teenage years, there'd be kind of like flashes in the media of stories kind of saying, Middlesbrough was regarded to be the worst place to live in England, and they had all the metrics for that. So, kind of levels of violence were the highest in my hometown, levels of kind of life attainment, life expectancy, mortality rate were the lowest. Educational attainment was really poor, poverty levels, you name it. With all of the worst metrics you can think of, Middlesbrough seemed to score the highest. And that was the story about the place I grew up. And, I grew up in a kind of what would be called in the American equivalent, the project. So living in the worst geographic location, and then in terms of the quality of housing, in that kind of residential neighborhood, there was a mismatch between, my lived experience of my life kind of to that point wasn't one of all of those factors. Because actually, I knew Sharon and Billy, and, they were my neighbors, they were my friends, they were my aunties and cousins and so on and so forth. But I guess I saw kind of the strengths and the beauty and the resiliency of those people and those communities. And like I saw a different story, and I wasn't able to articulate it at that point. I think there was a lot of hopelessness around, and I think I was certainly impacted by that. So I remember kind of low expectancy around, in terms of education. What's the point in kind of going to school? Because actually the pathways to continue beyond school, well, there were no jobs in our neighborhood. And so that impacted kind of levels of ambition. So I guess I inadvertently took on this identity that, my voice wasn't important. My people group, my people in my postcode were at the bottom of the pile. And at that point, I guess in terms of like traveling through school, because that was an identity form I inhabited, I wasn't really trying at school. And so as a result, I was in the bottom set. You know how they kind of, I don't know whether you guys do in America, but in England, typically what they do is kind of, they'll give you a test to do, and depending upon your scores, you'll be in the lower set for the people who got the lowest scores, the middle set for the mid scores, and the top set for people who got the highest scores. And I was in the bottom set for all of my subjects, and I remember, for English, one quick example, we were told that we weren't allowed to study Shakespeare. And so, everybody else in the year group was studying Shakespeare, but we weren't allowed, and we had to kind of study this play about kind of working class building site kind of group of men instead. And I still remember that, carrying that shame of, oh, I'm not good enough to study what everybody else is studying. But thankfully, I discovered a love of learning somewhere online. I think I was about 13 at the time, and I had this really kind of strange, indescribable moment of kind of staring out my bedroom window kind of one sunny day during the summer holidays from school. And it was kind of a bit of a daydream at the time, but it wasn't something that would have been naturally my thought given the context I've just described to you. And I just had this imagining of kind of that one day I would kind of write books, and that those books would be writing to help people kind of, it sounds a bit cliche now, but, to like be your best self and kind of, live an optimum kind of performance and stuff like that. And I remember being a little bit freaked out after this kind of imagining kind of like dissipated, because where did it come from? It was in the bottom set. But what that did was that it provoked in me a new sense of vision or belief. And so I remember going back to school, so age kind of going into my kind of final 2 years of secondary school, so age kind of 14, before taking GCSEs, and I went to every class and I started putting my hand up, saying, sorry, miss, I don't understand what you mean. When you say the sorry, what would that mean? And of course, that's not very popular when you're in the bottom group, especially in my neighborhood. So it was a very brave move. And by the end of my schooling, I was in the top or the middle set for all of my subjects. And so I discovered that I enjoyed learning, but my identity had shifted a little bit, but I still wasn't fully there. And so I kind of decided to go on to college to do A-levels. It's a 16 to 18 kind of age bracket. Mm-hmm. And I applied to do 3 A-levels, which is the typical, progression route. And I applied to the college, and they told me, based upon my grade, which I did okay, especially considering where I'd come from in the bottom 10, that I didn't have the good enough grade to do 3. I could only study 2. I was only allowed to study 2 A-levels. But despite that, in my A-levels, I did okay. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm kind of very kind of studious, and kind of, I didn't need an alarm clock to kind of wake up, which is kind of quite weird for a kid of that age. And it wasn't like I'd had these sort of skills modeled to me. I had loving parents, but they didn't have those study skills or that kind of regimen, if you like. And so I did okay at A-levels. And so then I remember like a friend saying, you should apply for university. And I was like, what, me? Because people from my postcode kind of went to prison or, didn't end up doing great jobs. But I applied because I had this dream or this something propelled me forward. And so I applied to do a law degree because I was watching all of these American shows at the time, LA Law and things like that. And it was like, hey, I can wear a suit and go for lunch and not do a lot of work. That looks great to me. So you're very misguided. But so I started off doing this law degree at university. I got accepted. I couldn't believe it. I remember kind of like handwriting as we did back in the day, in the mid-90s, applying to kind of university, 94, and handwriting my postcode and thinking, well, as soon as they see that postcode, my application's going straight to the bin. Somehow I got accepted. And started off on this law degree, but then I absolutely hated it because it was all the way which it was towards this institution in my hometown, still living with parents. So I didn't do the traditional moving away from parents just because of financial constraint. And, the lectures were very much like, this is what the law says. Remember it word for word. And this is what the judge says in that case. Remember it word for word. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like so dull. I don't want to be a human photocopier. And so for me, I've always, and I didn't realize this until that point, but I always ask the why question. Why did that outcome occur? And how can we look at that? And how can we analyze it? Which, was a natural skill set for being an academic, that analytical kind of critical mind that I didn't realize that I had. And so a friend of mine, I was kind of chatting with them in the first semester of year 1 of my degree. And they kind of said, and I was like, I'm really not enjoying it, think I'm going to drop out, which would have been fatal. I think if I'd have made that decision, it would not have turned out well. I definitely would not be sat here today. They said, I'm studying criminology. I think you'd love it because you love to debate. And they kind of knew me well. I kind of, And so I just met with the tutor, and in the first year I changed. And so for semester 2, I changed to criminology. And Dave, that was it. From then on, I just found my subject. I found my lane. And I think it was that thing of my passion meeting a skill set and a sense of purpose all coming together. And from that point on, I kind of got straight A's, and I left with a first class honours degree, which is the highest grade you can get with a new university degree. And it was just the journey from the bottom set as a teenager to then becoming, first class honours kind of graduate at university was just phenomenal and so encouraging. And that was it then. It was kind of, I got the bug. I just loved to devour knowledge. And I guess coming from that neighborhood, I had those insights that it wasn't just textbook knowledge, So I knew now that I wanted to become an academic. I wanted to teach, and I wanted to give back to, communities in that type of background for myself. So I wanted to do a PhD and become Dr. David Patton. So I can see all the way I'm challenging myself to grow and go to the next stage. But unfortunately, my parents couldn't afford the fees, bless them, they were like, we can move locations, or at least you can live with us and reduce your costs. And so I decided to take a year out, and I did a voluntary work in a local college and helped support kind of the teaching staff there, and was just their assistant, which was so generous of them to allow me to come into that environment. And that gave me then some experience in education to apply for a studentship. So whilst I was volunteering that year, I applied for a scholarship for a PhD. And again, that imposter identity comes out of, people like me, and, they're won't get accepted. And then I got invited for an interview, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is happening. This is crazy, And anyway, long story short, I got the scholarship, and it was to one of the best universities in criminology in the UK, Sheffield University, working with some of the most amazing kind of people in criminology. All the textbooks that I'd used and studied in my undergraduate, they're all there at that university. So I'm like, wow, this is incredible. And I think that's really kind of been my story, that as you kind of step out with that hope and that dream, and it requires all that you've got, the hours I would spend studying, and it wasn't like it came natural, I kind of didn't have to work at it. I worked really hard, had to develop the skills. And I remember reading the textbooks, computers weren't that common in those days. And so I'd have a paper dictionary, because every other sentence, there was 6 words in the sentence I didn't even know what they meant. So I'm writing down the words and writing down the definition. And then each week I'd kind of review the words, because, growing up in that neighborhood, the vocabulary was more street, or it was quite limited. And in order to kind of, write those assignments and kind of work at that level, it requires a larger kind of verbal repertoire. And that was the way I expanded my kind of vocabulary, step by step, bit by bit, and a lot of hard work. And here I am today as an associate professor in criminology. So, yeah. Sorry, that was a very long answer to your question, but I did warn you.
You say it's a long answer, but also I think that's a short summary of a very transformational journey as well. So long answer. No, that's a short version of a very long, inspiring story. And I found myself at a couple different points, like when you said you started sitting in the front row, excuse me, miss, raising your hand. The resilience, the grit, that the strength that it took to do that, to challenge, to go against the status quo as, a kid. I mean, where did that strength come from? Where did that resiliency come from?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the summer when I was 13. Mm-hmm. And I think that imagining that, I call it desire. And I think the power of desire, we really underestimate it. That infused within me a fire. And, I didn't have the vision right then, to become Dr. David Patton, but it deposited something within me. And I guess it contrasted as well a realization that if I continued doing what I was doing, that I was going to inhabit that lifestyle of the people around me. And that's not to judge that, but I had that realization during that imagining that that wasn't the lifestyle that I wanted. I didn't want to not have the money to be able to, for example, I was thinking about being a father and having children. And I thought, do I want my children to grow up in this neighborhood? Do I not want to have the resources to kind of take them on holiday abroad? So on and so forth. And I realized that unless I did something different, I was going to get the same results as exactly where I was. And also that was another fuel as well. So there was the desire as one kind of rocket booster fuel. And then also kind of clarity on kind of what I didn't want. And therefore kind of having to plunge head first into, okay, you're going to have to do a whole bunch of things differently. I didn't know what those things were. It was an evolutionary, organic, step-by-step journey that just came innately, Okay, Dave, you don't understand. How are you going to understand? You can sit here in silence and you'll still be there not understanding the content, which is not going to help you. So, yeah, do something different.
Yeah, I hear elements of I'll say the impact, the power of identity / crafting your own identity for yourself. I also hear the power of hope, of vision, of dreaming, and I saw you looking for the positive that exists. The positive is there, and leaning into that. And the sort of the last thing that I saw too was support of others. You had that friend that gave you counsel, gave you guidance as far as dropping out versus not dropping out.
Yeah, I found that time and time again at those key crossroads. There's always been somebody there who was just almost, the angel in disguise, if you like, who just kind of signposted you in the right direction to go. And, the same person who was the chief lecturer at college who allowed me to kind of work shadow her for a year, that she was another person who was very key in kind of helping guide and mentor and, position me to go into a new direction. And I guess infuse that sense of hope that you heard as well through the social relationship that then is transmitted for sure.
Yes. And I have a feeling we're going to touch on some of those again later in our conversation. But continuing on this journey, you're working in academics, and I'm just going to kind of, from my own personal experience, both getting my bachelor's and a master's degree and then working in higher ed, and I still work with a lot of higher ed folks across the United States, academics kind of do things a little bit different. May not necessarily use traditional or what I call like boots on the ground methods. Can you bring some clarity to me there? What do y'all do? How's it work? What happens?
Yeah. I mean, I think, what's very clear is that there's a whole school of thought that says to be an academic, that this is the way in which knowledge is created. And moreover, that this type of knowledge is supreme. This is the only kind of form of knowledge that is valid, objective, and scientific. And that kind of it's called positivistic kind of form of knowledge, which has been an amazing contribution and, really advanced our society and understandings of a whole range of phenomena. But I guess the downside of what that did was that it kind of nullified a whole raft of forms of knowing and types of knowledge. So, and I guess here what I'm talking about is kind of coloniality, that the white Western kind of male and their approach kind of said, okay, this is the way things are going to be done from now on. And so those localized, cultural, tribal, or, knowledge based from other countries were then literally kind of erased. And they create the hierarchy of supremacy. And then on the back of that, they created qualification. So in order to demonstrate that you are the possessor of knowledge and quality knowledge, well, then you need a piece of paper to verify that you are an expert and a professional. And the classic example of that is that I'm an associate with criminology, and I'm called upon to talk about kind of drugs, drug addiction, drug recovery, so on and so forth. But I've never used an illegal drug. I've certainly never been addicted to drugs. But I always find it quite amusing, why am I regarded to be the expert as opposed to somebody who has used the substances and or someone who's also gone down that pathway into addiction and moreover through the other side into recovery and now is leading a life kind of well-being and quality of life that, unsurpassable that they never imagined they could have. And that really highlights that hierarchy that exists, that, they can come along and be kind of wheeled out at an event. And it's like, oh, there's not a moving story. And even that word, it's a story, that power base is coming out. Whereas if I'm talking and doing a presentation, that I'm presenting knowledge, hard data, facts, and evidence. But aren't I telling a story as well with the data, with the research evidence? You can hear the words, can't you? And the contrast between them, and that exemplifies, illustrates the hierarchy. So for me, I do research differently. And that's again not to kind of to completely nullify the traditional forms of knowledge, because as I said, at the outset, they have made amazing contributions. And the survey is a wonderful tool, and interviews are wonderful for kind of gaining substantive forms of knowledge. But I think, thankfully, that research is now also embracing more creative and alternative styles of doing research. So, one of the methods that I kind of use is kind of photo voice. And a good colleague that we both know, kind of Mulka Nizik, introduced me and Professor David Best to this form of knowledge. And what it is, it's a form of participatory research. And again, it's not just about the way of gaining the knowledge. It's also about the way in which the research is conducted and the roles that people play within that knowledge-making process. So traditionally, it would be the academic comes in and they've thought about the research questions, or they're determining the agenda. And then they've written the kind of the survey questions or the interview kind of question. And I'll say, hey, Dave, will you be interviewed for my project? We're looking at this. Okay. And you'll say, yeah, I'm happy to kind of interview you. And so I'll ask you the questions. So I'm doing research on you and about you. And there's that hierarchy in the dynamics to that discussion. And then I'll thank you for your kind of sharing of your data. I'll take it away, analyze all of the kind of interviews that I've done, translate it and write up in my own words, and then publish it. And then I get the credit. And it's like, a minute, but I've used Dave's words and Billy's words and Lisa's words, but why am I getting the credit? So, photo voice is just one of a range of participatory methods whereby it's a group of people, communities that come together. We pose a collective question, say, hey, how are we going to look at this? What can we do to explore that? So photo voice kind of take people in a community with a given phenomenon. So in this example, kind of people who are in recovery. And you typically would say, the question could be, what has worked during your recovery journey? So it's a very open, exploratory question. And we then train kind of participants in the recovery community to take photographs and to consider what work in their journey. And that will look different for everybody. And they then go away as the researchers. So their role is as researcher, as an equal in the project. And then we literally see life through their lens, through their photographs. So there's no translator, there's no interpreter through the white male, typically academic lens. We see the photograph as it is, unedited, unadulterated. But then we also ask for a written piece to explain the significance of that photograph. And again, it's in their words, so it's unedited. And for me, that visual display with the written piece as a collective kind of representation of what works for that community is far more powerful and much harder form of evidence, stronger form of evidence than a PowerPoint presentation where I'm saying 25% of the people in this community use creative methods as a form of healing for their recovery journey. Could do that, but I think that that visual exhibition of that photographs allows for a much richer and deeper insight and entry into what really worked. So I'm so pleased that kind of the knowledge base is gradually changing. It's still very much on the margins and niche, unfortunately, but we're beginning to see the beginnings of that change. So yeah, I'm very hopeful that it's going to continue in that direction.
So many things I want to just dig into there. But first, a little nod. Love the participatory methods. That is something that I am big on in any training, any speaking. Yes, to the fact where if I can, I don't even use PowerPoint. I use sticky walls to really get folks up and participatory and moving around and actively engaged. But for the photo voice, the research there, the fact that the individuals going out taking the photographs and capturing that data, it's just in a different format, are, like you said, seen as equals. We're not taken advantage of. We're not
extracting and manipulating for our own agenda.
Yeah, exploiting their own personal stories for, like you said, for your gain, to publish, to establish yourself as an expert, and that aspect of peers and their researchers.
Yes, and put their names on the project, not mine. And that's the thing, if we use the traditional approach, I write it, I publish it, I curate it, so it's mine rather than the community's. And so with the participatory research approach, it's their names and their faces, providing they want to be named and identified. So we had protocols if that's not appropriate, but the principle is that it's much more owned by the community and disseminated by the community rather than the epidemic.
Much more powerful. It humanizes the data. It puts a real authentic story as well. I'm just fascinated. I would love to just see it and look at the pictures and read this. Like, I can only imagine how incredible it is. Like, what was it like for you going through and looking at those pictures and hearing the stories that go with them? What was that experience like?
Yeah, well, it's so moving. And it's also the fact that you never know what's going to come back. And so if people do want to look at some of them, that we have a website, which is pathways-to-recovery.co.uk. And you'll see that there's different locations across England that have contributed to that. We've got our first international kind of submission that will be posted kind of later this week. So that'll be a first. It's so moving. So I'll give you one quick example of one of the photographs. And so there was this chap in recovery, and he'd taken a picture of a clock, and he was using that as a symbol for time, the passing of time. And at the 12 o'clock was the start of his recovery journey, and 3 o'clock was 3 months, and then 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months in. And at the start of it, to the right of the clock, he put an empty key ring. And at the side of that, he said, at the start of my recovery journey, I've lost everything. So I'd lost my marriage, so I'd lost the key to my home. I'd lost my job, so I'd lost the key to the office. I'd lost my car because I couldn't afford to keep it anymore. And so that was the symbol of the empty key ring. And then, then as you move to 3 months, he said, I'd now kind of regained some trust and was able to have a kind of key, the mutual aid group and that community office. That was my first key. And then 6 months, he's now, reunited with a partner, and he's got the key to the house back in. And on it goes until you get the full key ring. And it's that story and that journey of how he's regaining trust and relationship and roles and responsibilities as he's progressing through his recovery. And it's really that empowering journey, and that visual. There's no way in words that I could have communicated that, the power of that and the depth of that, and that's the power of this type of research. It can't be presented or exhibited in any other form. And it can only have come together through that lived experience approach. I would never have thought of that idea.
Tell me a little bit more about sort of lived experience comes to crime and drug use.
Yeah, so for me, as I said, kind of lived experience is at the heart of the research that I do, because otherwise I think it's this facade that we're pretending that there are these experts and purveyors of knowledge and that we are the kind of geniuses of this knowledge base, even though all of our knowledge is coming from talking to people, who have got experience of that phenomenon. So, I did a study with people who were in prison, who were lifers, so life imprisonment, and, committed kind of really some of the most worst types of crimes, murder, sexual violence, and so on and so forth. And I was very privileged to kind of gain access to their diary as they'd participated in a kind of prison intervention program. And so I analysed their diaries for who was the future self that they longed to be upon release, and also what future life did they long to see. And this is what really kind of, for me, I think a lot of the understanding of lived experience, but that's about that individual, and that's their life experience, that's their story. And there's a level, of course, on which that is true. They are telling their experiences and their story. But when you get a body community of stories or photographs or whatever the kind of data, whatever form the data may come in, what you then see is, hang on, there are collective experiences here. They are not just unique to this one individual, but we can see them as a shared experience. But also, I think, moving much more deeper than that, that their individual stories telling a kind of a bigger story. So, for example, in addiction recovery, you often kind of hear somebody sharing a story, and, everybody's story is different, okay? But within that, some of the common themes might be kind of childhood trauma, abuse, kind of poverty, family dysfunction, bereavement, not getting on very well at school, say, not having certain opportunities or pathways presented to you in life, entering into kind of early kind of experimentation with drugs, and maybe some violence in the house and around you, and maybe not the best kind of peer support networks around you, and not very aspirational, positive environment and pathway, so on and so forth. And then that elongates into kind of addiction. And I think the problem with that when we just keep it on that level of this is Tom's story or Billy's story, inadvertently, what can translate is, oh, it's people like that. People with those characteristics, people with those life experiences, which invariably, I think, then gets coded to, it's a poor people's problem. And I think that also what it does is that it's individualizing the problem, because it's about individuals, And it therefore responsibilizes them. Well, if they didn't live like that, if they didn't have parents like that, or so on and so forth, so it's their fault. If they'd have done some things differently, those things would not have happened to them. Over here, we do things differently in our family and in our neighborhood and our community. People like us, we do things differently so that our children we don't have those life experiences. And I think that enters the narrative, unfortunately, implicitly, unconsciously, or otherwise. And what I do to challenge that is that we need to understand those macro structural and cultural forces that are at play. And as I opened with my own story, the context was I grew up in the northeast of England, not the south of England. That changed my childhood and life course experiences. Had I grown up in the south of England, I may have had a different quality of education and different pathways would be open to me that weren't there in the northeast. Maybe my dad would never have been made redundant because the industries that were available for employment in the south were different to those in the northeast. Do you get what I'm saying? And also, there was this chap we were doing this participatory action research, and he said to me, as we were discussing kind of around addiction recovery, he said, "Do you know what?" He said, "Society really effing screwed me up." And I said, "Tell me more." In what way? And he said, "Well, I've got to operate in the spaces and the rules that society's created, but they've not been kind to me." And he gave some kind of personal examples, which I won't share because I don't necessarily have permission to do so. And I was like, oh, okay. He wasn't citing the individual. My mama said this and my daddy did that. And at school, my teacher said this or didn't do that. And he was talking about a much larger factor. And then lots of other people started chipping into the conversation. And then this original guy who made this point said, but in recovery, he said, I now have tools and practices that help me heal and change. He said, and those are antidotes to all of this stuff in society that's caused all this damage to me. And that set me off on a whole different direction with my research. So I started to analyze the culture of recovery and looking at what are the norms, what are the practices of people in drug addiction recovery, what do they do? And what are their beliefs? What are their kind of rituals and ceremonies? And then I thought, okay, but this guy was talking about society in general. What is that culture? What things dominate that culture? And so, of course, in England as well as America, capitalism is a dominant kind of structural force that shapes our day and our week and the way that we live and see ourselves and our kind of family life. So what that does is that it individualizes us. It says we're an individual unit and we've got to be self-sufficient. That's why, it's kind of summertime in England, it's raining a little bit less. And it's really bizarre. I've lived on my street for about 13 years. And, on the sunny day that ever occurs in England, we're all out on the same Sunday afternoon with our kind of 13 individual lawnmowers kind of mowing the grass. And it's like, hang on a minute, why have we got 13 lawnmowers on this street? Why must we all operate as individual units? Why do we all have to be self-sufficient? Why isn't there this shared and collective kind of communal resource? And really it's about the self-sufficiency. I've got to be able to provide and, for my family, and you can't ask for help. You can't be vulnerable and saying, hey, can I borrow yours? Would that be okay? Because it's like, oh, you can't ask people for things. And I think about the workplace through capitalism's lens. I'm there because I'm paid to earn that company a profit. So I've got to perform and I've got to be productive. Now that's great in a season of life where everything's going well for me. But we all know, especially when you get to a certain age, there are different seasons of life and things don't always go well, either with yourself, your health, or with your loved ones and your extended family and community. So maybe there are times when you can't always give your 100% at work, but at work that you can't show that. in most of the teams, it's very cutthroat, and people are there to get the next promotion. And it's a shame and blame culture traditionally, and people will throw you under the bus at the first opportunity that you demonstrate that you've made a mistake. So typically conversations will be, hey, Peter, how's it going? How's the project? Yeah, great. Thanks, David. Thanks for asking. Yeah, we're on target, everything's going really great. Can't complain. And you're kind of like, oh, is it just my project then? Just me that's kind of making mistakes? Is it just me that's got a few difficult issues going on with my team? And so then you've got to put on this facade. Hey, I'm fine, thanks. Yeah, how are you? And over time, I think that's got an accumulative impact upon our health, our mental health, our emotional well-being, and I think within our deeper psyche, because it's actually transcending, we're breaching stuff that's intrinsic to us, and we pay the cost for that. And so I think bringing it back to this kind of the culture of recovery that I mapped out, actually is a very different culture operating there. It's very much around bringing your whole self into the situation. So whenever I come into a kind of recovery community and I'll say to somebody, hey, Lisa, how's it going? If she's having a great day and everything's going well that day, that will be what is shared. But actually, if it's a mixed picture or things aren't going great, that will also be shared. There's not that pretend, because they know they're not willing to compromise their well-being by pretending, because they've been there, done that, and they know that was a contributing factor to the demise of their well-being. And that separation from another, because if you're faking it all the time, where's your support network? Where are your genuine relationships? And so you see in the recovery community, the culture is one of kind of connection and authenticity. And there's a solidarity there. And yes, you hear people all the time saying, hey, can you help me? I'm struggling today with X or Y, with my mental health, or with doubts about this, or whether I can do something. And, and the support comes in bucket load. And oftentimes I think that people are so well known to each other that oftentimes they don't need to ask for help. The help is offered before it's even asked for, because they've noticed, oh, Lisa doesn't look herself today. I'm just going to check in with her and see what's going on. Or I'm going to do that act of kindness, or whatever it may be that they know will help in that situation that they're observing. And it's much more a kind of creative expression. Whenever I speak with people in recovery, that practice of creativity, all of its wonderful forms, whether it's immersing oneself in nature and connecting with nature and celebrating the creativity around you, or whether it's kind of the expression of your own creativity. And the traditional forms, people will do kind of creative writing, or even kind of daily journaling of their emotions and thoughts to connect with themselves and to kind of process that reconnection with the self, or songwriting, or kind of graffiti art, or poetry, or spoken word, or you name it. There's 101 more forms of creativity that are expressed. But, in the dominant culture, you think about kind of schooling for our children. It's like the creativity is washed out at such a young age. You're no good at drawing, so then nobody takes art. And creativity is limited to an art GCSE, rather than seeing it creativity within engineering, or creativity within science, or all of the subject. So it's boxed into this limited expression, and it quashes, I think, a fundamental part of who we all are to be human. And so I think for me, what I'm finding in the research, actually, yes, the individual life experiences and lived experiences is vital and at the heart of what I do. But actually, we also need to have another layer and understanding those macro, structural, and kind of cultural factors that also lead to addiction, that also can help somebody come out of it and restore and kind of, have higher quality of life and well-being. And that's what I really love now that research is showing, that people who 5 years or more in recovery have higher levels of quality of life and well-being than people in the general population. And I believe that one of the reasons for that is because of the different expressions of culture through all of those factors that I've just spoken about.
Okay, I'm jumping in because when you're sharing different sort of elements, the journaling, the journey within, the creativity, the being vulnerable. I know you were referencing the pool of knowledge that you gathered, but I thought you were just reading from my journal. Uh, but so just a little observation here. Yes, I can. Yep. I'm tracking. But I love. I wish we had a whole another hour at minimum to chat.
Let's do a part two.
Yes, please. And one of my it's more of a conference presentation, but it's titled "Culture is the Strategy," and it's greatly inspired by my own lived experience and also a few books that I've read, and one being The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And what I heard you talking about, I was able to, in my mind, map it directly to his three sort of pillars. The first one being safety. Folks need to feel safe.
Yeah.
Then the second one is vulnerability, but it's shared vulnerability. And this concept that vulnerability is a loop, that it's not just that, one person is vulnerable and shares,
Yes.
hey, I'm having a really crappy day. It's how the others respond in those moments of vulnerability
Absolutely.
that shape it.
Yes.
And then shared purpose, that common purpose. Those are kind of the three that he talks about a lot, and the power of how powerful culture is when it's good and when it's we'll just say not so good. Oh yeah, we could dig into that a whole heck of a lot, but I wanna talk more though about recovery, and this is kind of from my own lived experience. What helped me was shifting to more a positive, more of a strengths-based approach, looking internally, finding my strengths, and then using those to grow. Sometimes I'll, in a cheeky manner, say I became unintentionally intentional about flexing, building my personal development muscle. What work have you done around sort of strengths-based approaches?
Yeah, I think all of the work that I've done is kind of adopts that kind of perspective and that approach, because the medical model kind of comes along as the expert, does a diagnostic assessment, Dave, so tell me about life at this stage and at this age, and okay. It'll ask you all about the negative experiences and factors that you've experienced. And I remember, I set up a drugs education project when I first finished my PhD, and I was required to do this kind of risk assessment in the first session. So my first referral was this 11-year-old kid who was kind of selling cannabis at school. And then I was supposed to ask him all of I've just met this guy. We're in a small room. And I was supposed to ask him all of the kind of questions about essentially the most traumatic things that could ever happen to somebody on his first conversation with me. No, I'm not going to do that, because that's re-traumatizing, and every service or, person he then goes to has to complete their own version of it. So that's the classic example of, there's something wrong with it, there's a defect. And so going back to that expert, on the back of that kind of life history that they're taking, they'll then give you that kind of label and diagnosis that you are dysfunctional. You are 87% more likely to be violent again to somebody in the future. So you get this horrific label oftentimes, and then you're given an intervention. Here's the magic cure. This will be your solution. If you just engage with this and do this, this is going to sort you out. And often it's a short-term thing because, of course, funding, we can only see you for 6 weeks and the program's only for 6 weeks. But after that, big tick, you're sorted, now off you go. Whereas I think, the whole strengths-based approach is we're looking for what is wrong, not what's wrong, and changing the hierarchy. So we're kind of changing the relations and the way in which we're kind of working together. Equals is an evidence practice of the principle that this is a strengths-based approach rather than I'm the superior and I'm going to tell you how it's done around here. So, and I guess that what the knowledge that is then created on the back of that approach is completely different. So, I had the privilege of working with Cambridge University, and they were doing this national study around the connection between drugs and crime. And it was a Home Office funded multi-million-pound project. First time in England and Wales that we're kind of going to find out, are drugs and crime really connected? So there was a team of us that worked in a police station for a month at a time, 24/7 cover in every police station that we visited. And these people don't come in the police station, they've just been arrested. Sometimes it's taken like 8 police officers to drag this guy in who's like twice the size of me and the height of me. And then, you kind of knock on their cell door a little while later and you kind of say, hey, I'm David, I'm here from the Home Office and I work at Cambridge University. Would you be willing to have an interview? Well, what's it about? Oh, it's just about what drugs you've taken and what crimes you committed. Would that be okay? And you're in a police station. But what was amazing and what was really unethical at the time was that there was a budget that bought cigarettes. So in the transparent A4 kind of pack that you would be carrying with the interview schedule in it would be a box of cigarettes, which you never mentioned, but was there as the incentive for them to get out of their cells for however long the interview would last, half an hour, and they would chew the cigarettes so they would know that they could ask you for one. I mean, really bad. I ended up leaving the project because I just, for the reasons I'm about to tell you as well, so you'd be placed in this kind of 6 foot by kind of 6 foot room, and it'd be like, okay, so Tommy, tell me, have you ever used alcohol? Yeah. Cannabis? Yeah. LSD? Yes. Cocaine? Yes. Heroin? Yeah. But you're asking about all the drugs they've used. I say, okay, so have you ever committed burglary? Yeah. Ever committed assault? Yeah. And you ask them all these crimes, and so, how much money on a typical week do you make from your criminal activities? Oh, £1,000. Okay. And so tell me, have you ever sold yourself in exchange for money for sex? And you're like, okay. So if I'm asking those questions, what story, what report can I write about those people, Dave? Because all I've asked is a negative set of questions. So I went to the professor on that project and I said, hey, I just wonder if we could kind of expand the conversation a little bit and ask them, some leisure questions like what else do they do in their spare time? And what else do they spend money on apart from drugs? Because I wanted to humanize. And those questions were blocked precisely because it would have told a different story. And, on the positive side, the project kind of created the Drugs Act 2005, which then gave the police the power to drug test arrestees if they'd committed an acquisitive type crime, so burglary, robbery, crimes of that nature. And if they tested positive for heroin or cocaine, which was the big finding from the study, that those people who had used those drugs were more likely to commit way more crimes than the other people and were way more likely to be dependent upon those substances. So it allowed them to be fast-tracked to treatment. So a really positive outcome from the project. But when you read the reports about those people, it's horrific. You would think they were absolute monsters and demons. I was sat in the room with I literally did hundreds of interviews with those people. And I met them and I heard their story outside of the interview schedule. Because when you're asking those questions, they tell you a lot more than the direct question. And I really had issue that there was no sort of kind of signposting at the end of the project as to where they could go for support and help for those who were wanting to make a change. So I decided to kind of walk away from that project, which you've got to think about the context. That was like my first academic role, and I've just come from the project, and I'm turning down Cambridge University in the Home Office. But there was something in me ethically and morally that didn't align with. And so for me, the project that I lead, they've got to align with my values. And I can't intentionally or unintentionally kind of create harm to other people or share narratives of violence, which is really kind of introducing that hierarchy and saying that people like this are less than or worse than they actually are. So I kind of walked away from that with, coming full answer to your question, I absolutely offer strengths-based approaches in my work.
Yeah. And I'm just connecting and seeing how that has been informed by your lived experience, the identity that was put upon you growing up,
Yes.
and what that felt like, and you've experienced that, and you've learned from that, you've grown from that, and you're using that to inform and hopefully affect some positive change.
Trying.
Yeah, yeah. We're about time to land this plane. Running out of time, but I want to just touch on the global paper and inclusive recovery cities. We had Mulka and David Best on a previous episode. They really walked through inclusive recovery cities, but I know you had a part in the paper as well. And yeah, give me a shtick on that. What is this global paper?
Oh, it was fantastic. And it was kind of really the brainchild of Mulka. And, she had the idea of the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs kind of last year in 2023. And she's like, we've got to do this. And so she kind of mobilized everybody, as she's so great at doing. And so she got a team of us together. And really the purpose was there's so much division within this space. So, typically people in harm reduction and prevention and recovery and treatment, nobody talked to each other. I'm kind of exaggerating slightly, but, just to illustrate a point. And it all comes back to this kind of form of epistemic violence. These hierarchies of knowledge and, this way of doing it is better than this way of doing it, and this way is a superior form of knowledge, and your way is kind of invalid and not as professional and not as scientific or objective than mine, and all the risk of what you're doing, and all of that stuff. And it all gets messy rather than going, hey, we're all on the same team and maybe collectively together offering different options at different stages, and we're offering choice, because guess what? Not everybody is the same. So that was really the aim behind the global position paper, to try and bring unity and focus on where does everybody agree. And so we kind of did a 3-question kind of survey, which was an open-ended question kind of around, what was people's definitions and goals for recovery, what mechanisms for support do they see occurring in the recovery space, and what changes and recommendations do they have to kind of build a better kind of system of support. And so we then went out to kind of 53 countries and invited responses from all of the key players, people from all of those different perspectives and approaches, and we analyzed what everybody had said. We kind of wrote it, condensed it into a kind of 4-page document. And then we went back out to everybody again globally and said, take a read of this. Do you as an individual or you as an organization agree with these kind of this broad definition of recovery, these strengths and pillars of recovery, some of the barriers that we kind of commonly all see and experience, and also the kind of recommendations for change? And I think to date there's been in excess of 800 signatures from individuals and organizations from all continents across the globe. And it's just been a real pleasure to be part of it. And again, it's that co-production piece and it bringing disparate voices together, and it's a community approach. So it's been a real, amazing project. So bravo to everyone who's been involved.
The collective wisdom.
Yes.
Collective wisdom. And listeners, I'll drop a link in the show notes as well, so you can go give that paper a read if you have not already. And if it jives with you, give it a sign. Give it a sign. I appreciate the support there. And last but not least, because I also see this woven through our conversation today, would be inclusive recovery cities, which they talked a little bit about as well. But I see, what I love about it is it comes right back to culture.
Yes.
How it can shape and foster and nurture culture of recovery, and culture is the strategy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, this is really kind of Professor David Best and Charlotte Coleman, and they came up with this kind of concept of recovery cities. And what I love about it is that again, it moves us beyond the individual to that kind of structural issues within cities and what pathways exist, what stigma and barriers exist at the city level to promote or thwart kind of recovery. So how can we create more inclusive pathways across the city, in education, in the workplace, so on and so forth, in the recovery field as well, so that people who are coming to that stage of change can be supported and are in, at that place of growth much more readily and easily and inclusively than perhaps we've got at the moment. And because it's that kind of city level, it's like everyone's got a role to play. It's not just those who are affected directly, but everybody in that geographical location is indirectly or directly impacted. So let's all kind of play a part to create a more kinder and inclusive city for the people who live in our neighborhoods.
Absolutely. Before we close it out and hit end record for this part one of hopefully many more conversations, I want to just open it up to anything that we haven't touched on, or any kind of final message you want to share with our audience.
I think the final message really is a few different things. I guess one would be kind of, how can you, where you are right now today, with all of the kind of resources at your disposal and all of the limitation, how can you begin to make a positive shift? For yourself, what's your next kind of growth kind of challenge? And can you identify what that is? But then also kind of moving out beyond yourself and thinking, okay, how can I make things more inclusive, more accessible? How can I challenge the orthodoxy of the way things are done just because that's the way they are done, to create a more equitable and kind of just opportunity for people in my neighborhood, my workplace, or wherever you find yourself right now? I think that would be an awesome closing thought and comment.
And with that, I cannot add to that wisdom. I will just send some gratitude your way. It has been an absolute delight to have this conversation with you. And I'm still just as intrigued and curious and wanting to have many more conversations with you as well, because I too believe together is better. We can learn and grow together. Thank you very much for doing the work you're doing, having the conversations you're having, and not being afraid to challenge and change the status quo. Keep rocking.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for creating such an awesome space to have this conversation. I really appreciate you and the work you're doing here. So thank you.
That concludes this episode. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and share this episode with a friend before you leave. And we look forward to seeing you on social media, because prevention is better together. Together, we are stronger.